She whispered, "I've never felt this." And that night everything changed. He discovered her innocence held a mystery he never imagined. Where are you watching this story from? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to see what happened after that unforgettable first night. The ballroom of the Vendu Hotel spun beneath antebellum chandeliers like a carousel of history and promises. Thea held her trembling hand over her chest, feeling her heart accelerate in a way she'd never experienced in her 23 years of life. The exposed brick walls rose toward the ceiling like silent witnesses, while the harbor breeze drifted through open windows, carrying the salt-tinged scent of the Cooper River she'd known her entire life. The words she'd just whispered still echoed between them. "I've never felt this." Griffin stood motionless before her, this 40-year-old man who commanded tech empires without flinching, now completely disarmed by that confession. His dark eyes, which had witnessed million-dollar negotiations in Silicon Valley and Manhattan, met hers, and for the first time in decades, he felt words fail him. The impeccably tailored Italian suit he wore, the decisions he made with calculated coldness, the surname he carried like a golden chain since birth, everything vanished before the authenticity of this young florist from the French Quarter. What neither of them knew in that moment was that this first night together would be only the beginning of a journey that would test every fiber of what they thought was love. 3 months earlier, when Charleston's summer painted the streets in liquid gold, Thea worked 16-hour days in a small flower shop in the French Quarter. Her hands always smelled of damp earth and fresh petals of gardenias and jasmine, and she knew the scientific name of every plant she touched as if they were old friends. The shop was her grandmother's legacy, a woman with weathered hands and infinite wisdom who'd taught her that flowers speak when people cannot. Every morning, the alarm rang at 5 sharp. Thea would rise in her small apartment near the historic district, brew quick coffee, and leave to receive suppliers coming from the low-country farms. The smell of fresh soil, ripe peaches, and distant salt marshes accompanied her as she organized deliveries with surgical precision. Afternoons were dedicated to creating arrangements that told stories: bouquets for weddings celebrating new beginnings, funeral wreaths honoring memories, centerpieces transforming ordinary rooms into magical spaces. Her greatest dream was to expand the business, perhaps open a second location at the city market, or secure contracts with the hotels along King Street. But the debts left by her grandmother's illness formed a mountain that seemed insurmountable. Each night, Thea sat with bills scattered across her tiny kitchen table, doing math that never quite added up. The money was enough to survive, but not to dream big. Griffin Ashford appeared on an intensely humid afternoon, when Charleston's heat made everything seem heavier and stickier. He entered the flower shop visibly irritated, brow furrowed and phone pressed to his ear. His driver had gotten the address wrong for an important meeting at the waterfront park, and he needed a last-minute gift to compensate for the delay. One of his partners was waiting at a luxury restaurant on East Bay Street, and arriving empty-handed would be unacceptable. His presence filled the entire small shop. The impeccable Italian-cut suit that probably cost more than 2 months' rent, the Swiss watch gleaming on his wrist like a small sun, the posture of someone who'd never had to ask for anything twice. His gaze swept the shop with that rapid assessment businessmen make unconsciously, calculating value and efficiency in seconds. Thea didn't flinch. She wiped her hands on her soil-stained apron and looked him directly in the eyes, asking pointed questions in her soft, southern drawl. "Who's the gift for?" Griffin blinked, surprised by the direct tone. "For my mother," he responded in polished, neutral English, with that educated accent that erased any regionalism. "She's recovering from surgery." "What kind of relationship do you have?" Thea continued, rounding the counter to examine the buckets of fresh flowers. "Are you close? Distant? Formal?" The question unsettled him. No one questioned him this way. In his world, you placed an order and expected it fulfilled without interrogation. "It's complicated," he finally admitted, pocketing his phone. "Close, but formal. She has high expectations." Thea nodded, her fingers already moving among the flowers, with the confidence of someone who knows every texture and scent. She chose magnolias, with their creamy petals and intoxicating fragrance so characteristic of the South. She added white hydrangeas from local gardens, their soft tones bringing visual calm. She completed the arrangement with branches of live oak leaves, their deep green contrasting with the pale flowers. "Magnolia represents renewal," she explained as she worked, her hands moving with practiced grace. "It's the quintessential southern flower, the one our grandmothers treasured in their gardens. White hydrangea brings care and healing, its gentleness helps calm the mind, and the live oak symbolizes strength and endurance. This arrangement says, 'I wish you recovery but also peace in this difficult process.'" Griffin watched in silence, fascinated by how she transformed something ordinary into a message. In his world of contracts and screens, he'd long forgotten that things could have deeper meanings than their monetary value. "What do I owe you?" he asked when she finished wrapping the arrangement in cream tissue paper. $80. He pulled out his Italian leather wallet and placed a $100 bill on the counter. "Keep the change." Thea returned the $20 firmly. "I don't need tips. I charge what my work is worth, no more, no less." That response left him speechless. He took the change, mumbled an awkward thank you, and left the shop with the arrangement in hand, feeling something strange had just happened. He couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to him with that combination of pride and sincerity. Griffin hadn't planned to return. His life was perfectly compartmentalized: meetings in glass buildings downtown, business lunches at Michelin-starred restaurants, nights reviewing reports in his penthouse overlooking Charleston Harbor. The French Quarter flower shop didn't fit into any of those categories, but a week later, he found himself parking his Mercedes in front of the shop, with a prepared excuse that didn't convince even himself. It was 7 in the evening, and Thea was closing, pulling down the rolling door with the tired movements of someone who'd worked all day. "My mother cried when she received the flowers," Griffin said without preamble, hands in his suit pockets. Thea turned, surprised. Charleston's humidity still hung in the air, and strands of dark blonde hair escaped her ponytail, sticking to her damp forehead. "I'm glad," she responded with a genuine smile. "Mothers always appreciate thoughtful gestures." She asked who had the sensitivity to choose such a perfect arrangement. "I wanted to get to know the person responsible better." Thea tilted her head, assessing him with those hazel eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. "Do you want to know me, or do you need more flowers?" "Maybe both." They talked for 3 hours on the cobblestone sidewalk while the French Quarter came alive with nightlife around them. Young people passed on their way to bars and oyster restaurants, the smell of fried seafood mixing with the persistent floral scent emanating from the closed shop. Thea spoke about her grandmother, about growing up among the stalls at the city market, learning that every flower has its moment and meaning. She described mornings helping her grandmother select the best roses, afternoons learning to make perfect bows, nights listening to stories of clients who returned generation after generation. "Gran used to say flowers are like people," Thea recounted, leaning against the historic brick wall. "Some are showy but wilt quickly. Others are subtle but last weeks. The important thing is knowing which you need at each moment in your life." Griffin, in turn, revealed fragments of his story he rarely shared. He spoke about building a tech empire after studying at MIT and working in Silicon Valley, but admitted he felt empty, executing mechanical movements in a game that no longer excited him. His father had abandoned them when he was 16, leaving him as the man of the family suddenly. He'd had to assume responsibilities in the family import business before finishing college, transforming it into something far bigger than his grandfather ever imagined. "But somewhere along the way," he confessed, looking at streetlights reflected on the cobblestones, "I forgot why I was doing it. The numbers grew, the offices expanded, but I felt increasingly smaller. Sometimes success makes us forget who we were before achieving it," Thea responded softly. "My grandmother used to say that abundance without gratitude is just accumulation." Those words resonated in Griffin with unexpected force. That night, driving back to his penthouse, he didn't turn on music as he always did. He simply drove in silence, thinking about flowers with meaning and a woman who charged exactly what her work was worth. The encounters became frequent. Griffin appeared without warning, always with an excuse. He needed flowers for events at the Gaillard Center, for his office reception downtown, for business gifts. Thea saw through the lies and found them endearing. Such a powerful man, reduced to inventing excuses to buy flowers he probably didn't even need. They began dining together. He discovered a parallel world to his own, where value wasn't measured in stock prices, but in human relationships. Thea took him to the city market on Saturday mornings, when the sun barely started warming the streets, and vendors called their offerings in thick southern accents. The smell of fresh Atlantic seafood mixed with animated voices, creating a symphony Griffin had never truly appreciated, despite living in Charleston his entire life. "Look," Thea would say, taking a peach in her hands. "Feel the weight? Good peaches have density. And the smell," she'd bring it to his nose, "has to smell sweet and sun-warmed, not like nothing." She taught him to recognize real low-country honey from fake, to choose shrimp by texture, not just size, to perceive quality in details he'd never noticed. For Griffin, who made million-dollar decisions based on data and analysis, this sensory knowledge was revelatory. In exchange, Griffin showed her Charleston from heights she'd never experienced. He took her to the top of one of his downtown buildings, where the city spread like a living map beneath the coastal sky. He shared business visions she applied mentally to the flower shop: digital marketing, inventory management, strategic expansion. "You have something most companies lose when they grow," he said one night, while they ate she-crab soup at a restaurant in Mount Pleasant. "Authenticity. Every customer who leaves your shop feels they received something unique, not a mass-produced product." "And you?" Thea asked, serving more crackers. "Does your company have authenticity?" The question silenced him. He drank slowly, savoring not just the wine, but the discomfort of a truth he preferred to avoid. "No," he finally admitted. "My company is efficient, profitable, successful, but it has no soul. It's a well-oiled machine that generates money." "Then maybe you should ask yourself what you need all that money for." Griffin had no answer, or perhaps he did, but he'd gone so long without listening to it that he no longer recognized his own inner voice. The first major upheaval arrived in the form of a registered letter. Thea opened it on a Monday morning, after a night when she'd barely slept from excitement. She'd dined with Griffin at the most beautiful restaurant she'd ever been to, and he'd taken her hand across the table, a simple gesture that made her feel as if the entire world stopped. The words in the letter were formal, cold as the glass facades of skyscrapers. The building where the flower shop was located would be sold. The new owner already had plans to transform the entire block into a luxury commercial complex, like so many gentrifying the French Quarter. She had 90 days to vacate. Her hands trembled holding the paper. 90 days. 3 months to find a new location, negotiate rent she could afford, move all inventory, update records, notify clients. Her head spun with impossible numbers and shrinking deadlines. She tried to stay calm all week, searching for options on her own. She visited available spaces that were outside her price range, talked to realtors who looked at her condescendingly when they saw her finances, spent sleepless nights doing calculations that never quite added up. Pride prevented her from asking for help, especially from Griffin. She didn't want to be his rescue project, another task on his to-do list, but the weight became unbearable. On a Saturday afternoon, after another failed visit to a space that was too small and too expensive, Thea sat on a bench at White Point Garden and cried. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks while the world continued moving around her. Children playing, couples strolling, street vendors offering their wares. Griffin found her there by chance. He'd gone looking for her at the shop, and not finding her, followed his instinct through the quarter's streets. He sat beside her without speaking at first, simply offering his presence. When she finally spoke with a broken voice and swollen eyes, she told him everything. "I'm going to lose the shop," she whispered. "Everything Gran built, everything I've tried to keep alive, it's going to disappear." "Not if I can help," Griffin responded immediately, his mind already calculating solutions. "I can—" "No," Thea interrupted firmly, wiping tears with the back of her hand. "I don't want your money, Griffin. I don't want you to save me like I'm a business problem that needs capital. That's not how I see it. But that's how I'd see it." She looked directly into his eyes, her vulnerability mixing with dignity. "I need to do this myself. If you save me with your money, I'll never know if I truly deserved success or if I was just another of your charity projects." The words hurt, but Griffin understood them. In his world, money solved problems. But in Thea's world, some battles needed to be won with one's own hands for victory to mean something. "All right," he agreed, though every fiber of his being wanted to fix the problem. "But let me at least help you look for options. I know realtors. I can get them to show you places that aren't officially on the market yet. Thea hesitated, but finally nodded. There was a difference between accepting connections and accepting money. During the following weeks, Griffin worked discreetly behind the scenes. He used his contacts to find affordable commercial spaces in Mount Pleasant or James Island, neighborhoods that maintained character but had more reasonable rents. He negotiated with low-country suppliers for better prices, presenting it as a long-term business opportunity. He introduced her to event organizers at the Spoleto Festival, who needed florists for installations, opening doors normally closed to small merchants. He did everything carefully, presenting each opportunity as coincidence or casual contact. Thea suspected, but necessity spoke louder than pride. She accepted the disguised help, while continuing to search for alternatives on her own, visiting banks for loans that continued to be denied, talking to market acquaintances who might know of available spaces. The tension between need and independence created constant friction in their relationship. Some days Thea felt grateful for his support. Other days, she wondered if she was compromising her principles just to keep the business afloat. Griffin, meanwhile, fought against his instinct to simply write a check and end the suffering he saw in her eyes. The situation complicated when Thea had to start refusing large orders because she didn't know where she'd be in 2 months. An important wedding that could have generated excellent referrals, a contract with a new restaurant on the waterfront. Each lost opportunity was a stab, a reminder of how uncertainty was sabotaging her future. One night, after a particularly difficult day, Thea and Griffin dined in silence at her apartment. The tension was palpable, like humidity before a Charleston thunderstorm. Finally, she broke the silence. "Sometimes I wonder if this," she gestured between them, "can really work. We're so different, Griffin. You solve problems with phone calls and connections. I solve them with work and time. You think in millions. I think about making it to the end of the month." "Differences don't have to be obstacles," he responded, reaching for her hand across the table. "They can be complementary strengths. Or they can be fractures that widen over time," she countered, gently withdrawing her hand. "What happens when your family finds out about this, about us?" A French Quarter florist isn't exactly what they expect for the Ashford fortune heir. Griffin didn't respond immediately because he knew she was right. His mother had already made subtle comments about his absence at family events, asking why he spent so much time in that historic district. His siblings had noticed the change in him, how he prioritized simple dinners over business meetings. It was only a matter of time before the perfect world he'd built with Thea crashed against the reality of his family obligations. "I'll face my family when necessary," he finally said, with more conviction than he felt. "This, what we have, is worth fighting for." Thea wanted to believe him. She clung to those words as the 90 days became 60, then 45. But deep down, fear grew like toxic ivy. Fear of not being enough, of being just a phase in the life of a man who would eventually return to his world of privileges and expectations. The Ashford family officially entered the scene 2 months after Thea and Griffin's first encounter. The invitation arrived on thick, cream-colored paper with the family crest embossed in gold, a dinner at the family mansion in south of Broad, overlooking the Battery. Thea read and reread the invitation, feeling the weight of each carefully chosen word. "Cordelia Ashford has the pleasure of inviting you to an intimate dinner." There was nothing intimate about that rigid formality. "You don't have to go if you don't want to," Griffin said when she showed him the invitation, his voice laden with tension. "I can tell my mother that." "I'm going," Thea interrupted, with that southern pride that doesn't back down from challenges. "If this is important to you, then I need to meet your family, and they need to meet me." The night of the dinner, Thea put on her best dress, a simple navy blue one she'd bought at the outlet mall 2 years ago. She looked at herself in the mirror of her small bathroom and saw a girl from the quarter trying to seem like something she wasn't. She took off the dress and chose another simpler one, a terracotta color that reminded her of Charleston's clay rooftops. If she was going to meet the Ashford family, she'd do it being herself. Griffin picked her up in his Mercedes. The drive to south of Broad was silent, tense. He drove with a clenched jaw, and she looked out the window as the city lights gave way to the sophistication of the historic district. The mansion appeared like an illuminated palace in the night, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens and century-old live oaks. Thea swallowed hard, feeling that each step toward the front entrance was a step deeper into a world where she didn't belong. Cordelia Ashford waited in the marble foyer, a 60-year-old woman who wore pearls like armor and maintained the bearing of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. Her smile was polite but cold when she shook Thea's hand. "Delighted to finally meet you," she said in impeccable English, without a trace of southern accent. "Griffin mentioned your shop." The emphasis on the word shop was subtle but intentional. Thea noticed and raised her chin. "It's a flower shop," she corrected gently but firmly. "Inherited from my grandmother, who built it from nothing 40 years ago." The dinner was a careful orchestration of discomfort. The entire family was present. 2 of Griffin's brothers with their elegant wives, a younger sister with her well-connected boyfriend, and uncles observing from their positions at the long mahogany table. Conversation flowed in formal English, touching safe subjects: municipal politics, real estate developments, cultural events at the Dock Street Theatre. Thea maintained her composure, answering questions with disarming honesty. When asked about her education, she explained she hadn't gone to college because she needed to help her grandmother after her grandfather's death. When they wanted to know about her ambitions, she spoke passionately about the importance of preserving traditional family businesses in a Charleston modernizing so fast it sometimes forgot its roots. "And tell me, Thea," Griffin's sister Sloane interjected with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "what do you plan to do when you have to close your shop? Griffin told us about your situation." Silence spread across the table. All eyes fixed on Thea, waiting to see how the quarter florist would react to the veiled cruelty of Charleston's elite. Thea took a sip of wine before responding, giving herself time to control the fury bubbling inside her. "I'm going to find a new location," she answered calmly. "Businesses face challenges constantly. The difference is that some of us face them without $1 million safety net, which makes each victory mean much more." The comment fell like a silent bomb. Cordelia coughed delicately, and one of the brothers mumbled something about dessert. Griffin took Thea's hand under the table, squeezing in silent support, but she already knew that evening had drawn battle lines that wouldn't easily erase. After dinner, while Thea waited in the foyer to say goodbye, she heard raised voices from the study. She recognized Griffin's voice and his mother's, arguing in tense tones. "She's not appropriate for you," Cordelia exclaimed. "A florist with no education, no family, nothing to add to our name." "Stop, Mother," Griffin responded with strained voice. "Thea is worth more than all the hypocrisy in this family combined. If you can't see that, the problem is yours, not mine." Thea moved away before hearing more, stepping into the garden where the fresh Atlantic air burned her lungs. Tears of anger and humiliation rolled down her cheeks. They weren't tears of weakness, but frustration at a system that judged her not for who she was, but for what she didn't have. Griffin found her minutes later, with a tortured expression. "I'm sorry," he started to say. "It shouldn't have been like that." "Don't apologize for your family," Thea interrupted, wiping tears. "But also don't ask me to pretend this doesn't matter. Your mother is right about one thing. We come from different worlds. And maybe trying to unite them is harder than we both thought." "Don't say that." "Why not?" She turned to him, pain reflected in every line of her face. "Look at you, Griffin. You're trapped between what you feel and what's expected of you. And I'm tired of feeling like I'm not enough. Not for your family, not for your world, maybe not even for you once the novelty wears off." "That's not true," he protested, trying to take her hands. But she pulled away. "Take me home," she requested with a broken voice. "Please." The drive back was even quieter than the one there, but now the silence was loaded with unspoken words and crumbling futures. When they arrived at Thea's apartment in the historic district, she got out of the car without looking at him. "Thea, wait. I need to think," she said without turning. "About this, about us, about whether I want to always feel like I did tonight." "I love you," he whispered desperately. She stopped, her hand on the building's door handle. "I love you too," she admitted with a broken voice. "But sometimes love isn't enough when the rest of the world is against us." She climbed the stairs without looking back, leaving Griffin in his luxury car, on a simple street in a neighborhood his family would probably never visit. For the first time in his life, all his money and power couldn't fix the only thing that truly mattered. 3 days passed without communication. 3 days when Thea worked like an automaton, creating floral arrangements with mechanical movements, smiling at customers without really seeing them. At night, she sat on her small balcony overlooking the historic district streets, holding her phone, writing and deleting messages she never sent. Griffin, meanwhile, buried himself in meetings, signing contracts without really reading them, approving projects without processing details. His assistant noticed the change, how he stared out his office window toward the horizon where the French Quarter hid, as if he could see through buildings to the small flower shop. It was Cordelia who forced the confrontation. She appeared at Griffin's office on a Wednesday afternoon unannounced, occupying the space with her authoritative presence. She sat across from his desk without being invited, crossing her hands over her designer handbag. "We need to talk," she said in a serious tone. "I have nothing to discuss with you about Thea," Griffin responded, keeping his gaze on the papers on his desk. "That woman is not suitable for you. That woman has a name, and she's more suitable for me than any of the good family women you've tried to push on me for years." Cordelia pressed her lips together, controlling her temper with decades of practice. "You have no idea the harm this relationship could do you. The business, the family reputation, the expectations." "To hell with expectations," Griffin exploded, standing abruptly from his chair. "You know what, Mother? I've spent 40 years meeting expectations. I studied what you wanted me to study. I took over the company when you asked. I married who you thought appropriate, and you saw how that disaster ended. And through all that time, never, not once, was I genuinely happy." The mention of his first marriage, that silent failure they'd buried under layers of social discretion, made Cordelia tense. That situation was different. It wasn't. It was exactly the same thing, choosing what was expected instead of what I felt. And I'm not making that mistake again. They stared at each other in silence, mother and son, separated by an abyss of generations and values. Finally, Cordelia stood, smoothing her designer skirt. "If you continue with this woman, you'll have to face the consequences," she said coldly. "The family has expectations. Business partners have expectations. And I expected more from you." "Then maybe it's time to disappoint you," Griffin responded sadly. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm going to choose myself." Cordelia left the office without responding, her silence more eloquent than any words. Griffin sank into his chair, feeling simultaneously liberated and terrified. He'd crossed a Rubicon, and there was no going back. But when he tried to call Thea, she didn't answer. Messages were left on read, but without response. It was as if she'd built a wall between them, brick by brick made of pain and doubt. Meanwhile, Thea had made a decision. If her relationship with Griffin was going to survive, she needed to prove she could support herself. Without his help, without his connections. She found a tiny space in James Island, smaller than her current shop, but available and affordable thanks to a loan she got from an aunt who had a stand at the farmer's market. The space needed complete renovation, peeling walls, old fixtures, cracked floor. She began working on the renovations herself. She spent days attending the shop that would soon close, and nights painting walls, fixing plumbing, polishing the old tile floor she'd discovered under layers of linoleum. Friends from the neighborhood came to help on weekends, bringing sweet tea and sandwiches, turning the work into community. One night, while sanding a window frame, her best friend Sloane sat beside her. "You gonna tell that rich man of yours that you're killing yourself working here?" she asked bluntly, offering a bottle of water. "He's not my rich man," Thea responded, wiping sweat from her forehead. "And I need to do this alone." "Pride is a dangerous crutch, Thea. Sometimes it holds us up, sometimes it makes us stumble." Thea stopped sanding, looking at her calloused, paint-stained hands. "I'm scared, Sloane. Scared that if I let him help me, I'll never know if I achieved this on my own merit or through his connections. And I'm scared his family is right, that I'm not enough for him." Sloane hugged her tightly. "You're more than enough. But if that man really loves you, he has to be willing to fight his whole world to prove it to you. And you have to decide if you're willing to let him try." Those words echoed in Thea for days. Because the truth was, she'd been punishing Griffin for his family's actions, building walls not just to protect herself, but to keep him at a distance. It was easier to push him away before he eventually left her, wasn't it? The breaking point came when the work became too much. One morning, Thea woke unable to move her right arm from pain. She'd pushed her muscles beyond their limit, painting until 3 in the morning after a full day at the shop. She had to close the flower shop that day, something she'd never done, and the lost revenue terrified her. Sitting in her apartment, with her arm in a sling, she finally broke and called Griffin. He answered on the first ring. Thea. His voice sounded desperate, as if he'd been waiting for her call for centuries. I need to see you, she whispered. If you still want to, give me your address. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Griffin arrived in 8 minutes, taking curves in the Mercedes that would probably horrify his insurance company. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time to the 3rd floor where Thea lived. When she opened the door, pale and with her arm in a sling, he felt his heart constrict. What happened? He asked, entering and closing the door carefully. Worked too hard. Strained the arm. It's not serious, just tendinitis, she responded, trying to sound casual but failing completely. Working too hard where? Thea looked at him, her tired eyes revealing weeks of sleepless nights. I found a space. In James Island. Smaller, needs renovations, but it's mine. Well, it'll be mine once I pay off the loan for the next 10 years. And you're doing the renovations yourself? She nodded, and sudden tears filled her eyes. I needed to prove I could do it alone. That I didn't need you or your money or anything, but... Her voice failed. I'm so tired, Griffin, so incredibly tired. He crossed the room and wrapped her in a careful embrace, conscious of her injured arm. She collapsed against his chest, finally allowing all the tension of the past weeks to flow in silent tears. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, he murmured against her hair. You're already extraordinary. Your family thinks otherwise. My family is wrong. And if they can't see that, that's their problem, not yours. They stayed like that for long minutes, breathing together, reconnecting in silence. Finally, Thea pulled back slightly, wiping tears with her free hand. I was scared, she admitted. Scared that what we feel wouldn't be enough against everything else. Your family, our differences, the money. It all seemed too big. Everything is big until we decide to face it, Griffin responded, gently guiding her to the couch. And I want to face it. With you. Not in your place, but by your side. What does that mean exactly? It means I'm going to that space of yours in James Island tomorrow morning. I'm going to help you with the renovations, not with money or expensive contractors, but with my own hands. And it means when my family tries to make you feel lesser again, I'm going to defend us with every breath I have. What about your family? I already told my mother. I made it clear I'm choosing my happiness over family expectations. And how did she react? With threats and coldness, expected. But Thea, he took her hands carefully. My mother spent her whole life measuring value by surnames and bank accounts. I don't want to live like that. I want to measure value by honesty, by passion, by how someone makes each day meaningful. And you make everything meaningful. She closed her eyes, letting the words penetrate. When she opened them again, she'd made a decision. Okay, you can help me with the space, but with your hands, not your money. And if at any point I feel you're taking control or trying to fix things without consulting me, I promise I won't, he interrupted. You'll make the decisions, I'll just be the extra muscle. A small smile appeared on Thea's face, the first genuine one in weeks. Extra muscle. I like how that sounds. The following days were transformative. Griffin appeared at the James Island space at 7 in the morning, dressed in old jeans and a t-shirt he'd probably bought in college. Thea barely recognized him without the designer suit. They worked side by side, sanding walls, painting with colors she chose, installing shelves. Griffin discovered muscles he didn't know he had, gaining blisters on hands that had always held gold pens and expensive phones. Thea watched fascinated as he consulted YouTube videos about fixing plumbing, taking meticulous notes and applying the same analytical approach he used for multi-million-dollar deals to plumbing problems. Sloan and other neighborhood friends also came to help, bringing food and laughter. At first they were cautious with Griffin, this rich man in their territory, but gradually accepted him when they saw he really worked, had no problem getting his hands dirty or taking orders from Thea. One afternoon, while resting on the floor with po' boys from the corner deli, Sloan looked at Griffin directly and asked, "Why are you really here? Is it guilt or love?" Griffin wasn't offended by the direct question. "It's love," he answered simply. "And because I discovered that building something meaningful is more satisfying than signing contracts for millions of dollars." Nice answer, Sloane commented. But love is easy when you're in a honeymoon phase. What happens when it gets hard? When your family pressures more? When your world and Thea's truly conflict? Then I'll choose the world that makes me happy over the one I'm expected to choose. Sloane nodded, satisfied, and the rest of the friends gradually relaxed their protective vigilance. Thea listened to the exchange in silence, feeling something fundamental had shifted. Griffin wasn't just saying the right words, he was living them. 3 weeks later, the space was nearly finished. Walls painted the color of Charleston clay, reclaimed wood shelves they'd found at a James Island flea market, refrigeration system Griffin had installed after watching 30 instructional videos. It was simple, welcoming, authentically hers. The night before the opening, Thea and Griffin sat in the center of the empty space, surrounded by the smell of fresh paint and possibilities. "Thank you," she said softly, "not just for the physical help, but for respecting that this needed to be mine." "You taught me something important," he responded, looking at his calloused hands, "that there are different types of success, and that building something with your own hands, something that matters, is worth more than any corporate acquisition. Are you coming tomorrow, to the opening?" "If you want me there, I'll be there." Thea took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "I want you there. Not hidden or apologizing for who you are, but with me. Openly. Then I'll be there." What neither of them anticipated was that Cordelia would come too. The opening of Magnolia and Maine, the name Thea chose honoring Charleston's most beloved flower, was a humble but beautiful event. The small space was filled with neighborhood locals, lifelong friends, customers from the old shop who'd followed her to James Island. There was sweet tea and pralines, soft jazz playing in the background, and floral arrangements scattered like living sculptures telling stories of renewal and hope. Thea glowed with genuine happiness, moving among people with her arms still weak, but her spirit completely restored. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that swayed with her movements, and flowers woven into her dark blonde hair. She was in her purest form, rooted in community, blooming in authenticity. Griffin watched from the side, letting her have her moment without eclipsing it. He wore casual but elegant clothes, a balance he was beginning to master between both worlds. Several neighbors approached, curious about Thea's rich boyfriend, and he responded with sincere humility, not mentioning companies or investments, simply sharing his admiration for what she'd accomplished. That's when the door opened and Cordelia Ashford entered. Silence gradually settled as people noticed her presence. Cordelia stood out in that simple space, like a diamond in sand. Designer dress, impeccable pearls, the posture of someone who'd never doubted her right to occupy any space. But there was something different in her expression, something less rigid than in their previous encounter. Thea's eyes met Cordelia's across the room. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Thea walked toward her with her head held high, offering her hand. "Mrs. Ashford, it's a surprise to see you here." Cordelia shook her hand, and when she spoke it was with unexpected softness. "I needed to see for myself what my son found so special." Griffin approached, tense, ready to intervene if necessary. But his mother stopped him with a gesture. "I've been thinking a lot these past weeks," Cordelia continued, looking around the space, "about what's really important. And perhaps I was wrong." The words fell like stones in calm water, creating ripples of surprise. Thea exchanged a glance with Griffin, who seemed as surprised as she was. "My son has never been so happy," Cordelia continued. "I saw him work on this place. He told me he'd never felt as satisfied as when building something with his own hands, something that truly mattered. And I realized that I kept him bound to expectations that perhaps were never his." "Mother," Griffin began, his voice choked with emotion. "Let me finish," Cordelia interrupted gently. "I spent my life building walls, protecting a name and a legacy, but in doing so, I forgot to teach the most important thing, that happiness isn't measured in assets or strategic alliances. It's measured in moments like these, surrounded by people who matter, building something that has soul." She turned to Thea, and there was genuine humility in her eyes. "I won't lie and say this is easy for me. I spent decades with certain beliefs about how things should be, but seeing my son shine in a way he never has, seeing the strength and dignity with which you built all this without anyone's help, I can't deny there's something special here. Thea felt unexpected tears stinging her eyes. "Mrs. Ashford, Cordelia, please." A small smile, almost shy, appeared on the matriarch's face. "And perhaps with time, we can truly get to know each other, without judgments or expectations, just as two people who love the same man, though in different ways." It was an imperfect olive branch, weighted with the difficulty of real change, but it was genuine. Thea felt it in how Cordelia looked around the space, without the veiled disdain from before, but with honest curiosity. "I'd like that," Thea responded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'd like that very much." Cordelia nodded and, to everyone's surprise, walked around the space, observing the floral arrangements, asking questions about different plants, truly listening to Thea's explanations. She didn't stay long. Lifetime barriers don't fall in an afternoon, but her presence and her effort were enough for now. When she left, Griffin hugged Thea from behind, his face buried in her hair. "I can't believe she came, that she said that. People can change," Thea murmured, "if they have enough reasons to. You were the reason. Seeing it in me." Seeing us. But even as the celebration continued, and the James Island community embraced Magnolia and Maine with open arms, Thea couldn't shake a feeling of unease. It was as if they were in the eye of the hurricane, in a moment of calm before the next storm inevitably arrived. She was right to be uneasy, because 3 days later, Thea's mother had the accident that would change everything again. The phone rang at 4 in the morning on a Tuesday. Thea answered half asleep, and the voice on the other end was her Aunt Gemma, breaking between sobs and rushed words. "Thea, you need to come to the hospital. Your mother had an accident." The world stopped. Thea dressed with trembling hands, not really processing what she was putting on. A simple trip on Meeting Street, they explained later. Her mother, Maeve, had gone out early to buy bread and slipped on wet pavement. The fall itself wasn't serious, but it revealed something much worse, an undiagnosed heart condition that had been developing silently for years. At MUSC Hospital, doctors spoke in technical terms Thea barely understood. Severe arrhythmia, need for intervention, specialized treatments. Medicaid would cover the basics, but the more advanced procedures, the ones that could truly improve her mother's long-term quality of life, cost money they didn't have. During the following weeks, Thea lived in a fog of hospital corridors, medical consultations, and sleepless nights. She divided her days between Magnolia and Maine, which had just opened and needed constant attention, and the hospital, where her mother rested connected to monitors that beeped softly. The circles under her eyes deepened, clothes hung loose because she forgot to eat, and her hands trembled constantly from exhaustion. She hid all this from Griffin. Not from pride this time, but from shame. Shame at needing help again, at being the woman with constant problems, at not being able to handle her life without him having to intervene. She began cancelling dates with vague excuses. Too much work, exhausted, needs time to focus on business. Griffin noticed the change but respected her space, sending supportive messages without pressure, but worry grew in him like a tumor. Something was wrong. He felt it in his bones, but he didn't know how to help someone clearly building walls again. Medical bills began arriving, stacks of paper with numbers that made Thea's head spin. She started working double shifts at the shop, accepting every possible order, cutting personal expenses to minimum. She stopped going out with friends, declined invitations to Sunday brunches, started buying the cheapest groceries. Sloane was the first to notice something was seriously wrong. She showed up at Magnolia and Maine on a Thursday afternoon and found Thea asleep at the small back office desk, with dark circles under her eyes and bills scattered around her. "Thea, wake up." She shook her gently. Thea woke, startled, disoriented. What time is it?" "6. You have customers waiting outside. How long have you been like this?" Thea rubbed her eyes, trying to focus. The room spun a little. "Your mum's in the hospital, right?" Sloane continued. "Your aunt called me. Why didn't you tell me anything?" "Because I can handle it alone," Thea responded automatically, standing with clumsy movements. "Clearly you can't. Look at yourself. Did you eat today?" Thea tried to remember. She'd had coffee in the morning. Anything else? She couldn't remember. "Did you tell Griffin?" "No." "Why not?" Because I'm tired of being the woman who needs rescuing, Thea exploded, with sudden tears rolling down her cheeks. I'm tired of being a problem that needs solving. I want to be enough on my own, without having to ask for his help all the time. Sloane hugged her as she crumbled, sobbing against her friend's shoulder. Asking for help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. But Thea wasn't ready to listen. She pushed forward, driving herself beyond reasonable limits, selling some furniture from her apartment to pay bills, negotiating impossible payment plans with hospitals. Her health began deteriorating, constant headaches, trembling hands, a cold she couldn't shake because her immune system was compromised by stress. Griffin discovered by accident. He went to Magnolia and Maine without warning, hoping to surprise her with a dinner invitation. He found her exactly as Sloane had, asleep at the desk, exhausted beyond reason, surrounded by medical paperwork she hadn't had energy to hide. His heart broke seeing her like that. He knelt beside the chair, touching her shoulder gently. Thea, love, wake up. She opened her eyes slowly, and when she focused on him, panic crossed her face. Griffin, you shouldn't be here. How long have you been dealing with this alone? He asked softly, pointing to the hospital papers. It's not your problem. Of course it is. Your mother is sick. You're working yourself to death trying to pay for treatments, and you shut me out completely. Because I don't want to be your charity project, she responded with a broken voice, eyes shining with unshed tears. I don't want you to see me as something that needs fixing. Griffin took her hands carefully, noticing how they trembled. I've never seen you that way, and asking for help doesn't mean you're not strong. It means you trust someone enough to be vulnerable with them. I have nothing to offer you in return, Thea whispered. Just problems and debts and endless complications. You offer me your presence, your honesty, the opportunity to be part of your life, even the difficult parts. That's worth more than anything my money can buy. Finally, she gave in. She let the armor fall completely, telling him everything. The severity of her mother's condition, the bills that kept coming, the double shifts, the sleepless nights, the constant fear of losing both the business and her mother. Griffin listened to everything without interrupting. When she finished, exhausted by the confession, he simply said, "Let me help you. Not with money or quick fixes, but with presence. I'm going to be with you at every medical appointment, every difficult conversation with doctors. We'll find solutions together." And he kept his word. In the following days, Griffin completely reorganized his schedule. He delegated meetings, postponed business trips, put the company on autopilot for the first time in his life. Each morning he arrived at MUSC Hospital with coffee and something for Thea to eat. He sat in waiting rooms that smelled of disinfectant, holding her hand through difficult news, translating medical jargon into understandable terms. He used his network of contacts, but not to buy solutions, rather to find resources, specialist doctors willing to consult pro bono, state assistance programs Thea didn't know about, charitable organizations that helped with medication costs. He taught her to navigate the healthcare system, to negotiate payment plans, to seek second opinions. He organized something else too, without telling her at first. He contacted Charleston business people he knew, explaining the situation without violating Thea's privacy. He created a solidarity campaign, Flowers of Hope. Each business person would purchase special floral arrangements from Magnolia and Maine, and profits would go directly to help with Maeve's medical expenses. When he told her the plan, Thea initially resisted. "It's disguised charity." "It's not," Griffin insisted. "You're selling a product people genuinely want. I'm just using my contacts to connect buyers with your business. Your work's quality does the rest." Reluctantly, she accepted. And it worked. Orders came in masses, companies wanting floral decoration for events, wealthy families ordering elaborate arrangements, hotels contracting monthly services. Thea worked tirelessly, creating pieces that justified every dollar charged, maintaining her quality standard even under pressure. Maeve gradually improved. Treatments began working, her heart stabilized, doctors started talking about long-term recovery instead of just crisis management. When she was finally discharged, Thea cried in Griffin's arms in the hospital parking lot, tears of relief mixed with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted, her voice muffled against his chest. "But you did. I was just beside you while you did." That night, exhausted but hopeful, they dined at Thea's apartment. Simple takeout from a neighborhood restaurant they loved, cheap but cold beer. When they finished, Thea took both of Griffin's hands across the table. "I love you," she said simply. "Not just for helping me, but for how you did it. For respecting my need to be strong while giving me permission to be weak too." "I love you too," he responded, "and I want to do this for the rest of my life, the good moments and the difficult ones." It was the first time either of them mentioned the rest of my life, and the weight of those words hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. But first, they'd have to face one last challenge, one that would test if they were truly ready to unite their lives completely. Maeve's recovery brought temporary stability, but also revealed the fragility of the balance Thea had achieved. Magnolia and Maine was growing rapidly, perhaps too rapidly. Orders from the Flowers of Hope campaign didn't stop after Maeve left the hospital. Customers were impressed with the quality and kept ordering. The small James Island space was saturated. Thea had to hire 2 assistants, then a delivery driver with a van. The walls she'd painted with her own hands were now covered with shelves packed with orders. The refrigeration system Griffin had installed worked non-stop. But even with more staff, she herself worked endless shifts, designing each arrangement personally because she couldn't let go of control. That's when the proposal came. A representative from Coastal Hotels Group appeared on a Wednesday afternoon, dressed in an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He explained that their luxury hotel chain, from the Charleston Place downtown to properties in Hilton Head and Kiowa Island, was seeking an exclusive contract for floral decoration, all their lobbies, restaurants, VIP suites, special events. The numbers he presented made Thea lose her breath. It was more money than she'd earned in her entire life, enough to pay all remaining debts for her mother, significantly expand the business, hire more staff, secure financial stability for years. But there were conditions. To meet the demand, she'd need to expand rapidly. A larger space, possibly several industrial-scale production, automated systems. Arrangements would have to be somewhat standardized to maintain efficiency. She'd have to delegate design to others, train them in her style, but inevitably lose the personal touch that made each piece unique. They gave her a week to decide. Thea was torn. That night, she sat at the desk in her closed shop, looking at the numbers over and over. Financially, it was the obvious decision. Refusing would be crazy from any rational business perspective. But every time she imagined mass production, standardized arrangements, losing that personal connection her grandmother had valued so much, something in her chest tightened. She talked to Sloane first, who almost fell off her chair hearing the numbers. "Are you crazy? You have to accept. It's the opportunity of your lifetime." "But it'll change everything," Thea protested. "They won't be my flowers telling stories anymore. They'll just be pretty decoration produced by a team." "Thea, pragmatism exists. Your mother needs security. You need security. This would give you that." She talked to her mother, who held her hands with her own still weak hands. "Honey, your grandmother always said flowers speak, but she also said people evolve. You're not betraying her if you grow in a different way than she did." Finally, she talked to Griffin. They went to their favorite spot, a bench at Waterfront Park, where the harbor stretched before them and the city reflected in the water. Sunset painted the sky orange and pink, and the sound of children playing in the distance created a soft soundtrack to their conversation. She showed him the numbers, expecting that, as a businessman, he'd encourage her to accept immediately. But Griffin surprised her. "What do you want? Not financially, but in your heart. What do you want your business to be?" "I want—" Thea paused, searching for the right words. "I want every customer to feel they received something made especially for them. I want the flowers to keep telling stories, not just filling spaces. But I also want stability. I want to not wake up every morning wondering if I can pay rent." "Then negotiate," Griffin responded simply. "These hotels want you because you're different, because you offer artisanal quality they can't get from big corporate suppliers. Use that as leverage." "What do you mean?" "Counteroffer. A smaller contract to start, just 1 or 2 hotels. Gradual growth that lets you maintain quality while expanding. Team training that preserves your artistic vision. Clauses that give you creative control even as you grow." What if they say no? Then it wasn't the right deal anyway. "Thea, You taught me something I'll never forget, that there are companies that lost their soul by growing too fast, becoming generic brands. Don't let that happen to you. During the next 3 days, Thea worked on a counter-offer. Griffin helped her structure numbers, anticipate objections, create a business argument that justified her terms. They practiced the presentation until she could deliver it confidently, without hesitation. The meeting was at Coastal Hotels Group's corporate headquarters, a glass building on the waterfront that intimidated just by its facade. Thea presented herself dressed professionally, but without trying to be something she wasn't. Simple skirt, white blouse, hair in a bun that let some naturally wavy strands escape. The conference room was full of executives, the purchasing director, the experience manager, the CFO. They all looked at her with barely disguised skepticism when she presented her counteroffer. "With all due respect, Miss Hartley," the purchasing director said with barely veiled condescension, "our offer was extraordinarily generous. What you're proposing significantly reduces the scope." "What I'm proposing," Thea responded calmly, maintaining eye contact, "is to preserve exactly what makes you want to work with me in the first place. You don't need another supplier who can deliver 1,000 identical arrangements. You have dozens of options for that. You chose me because each piece I create tells a story, because there's soul in my work. If I expand too fast, I'll lose that, and you'll end up with pretty but generic decoration. Luxury hotels require consistency," the experience manager argued, "and you'll have consistency. Consistency of quality, attention to detail, craftsmanship. What you won't have is soulless uniformity. Starting with Charleston Place and the Kiowa Hotel will let me establish systems that preserve my vision while I learn to scale effectively. After 6 months, we evaluate results. If it works, we expand gradually. If not, you only risk 2 properties, not your entire chain." Silence spread through the room. The executives exchanged glances. Finally, the CFO spoke. "We need to discuss internally. We'll give you an answer within 48 hours. Thea left the building with trembling legs, not knowing if she'd just saved her vision or destroyed the opportunity of her life. Griffin waited for her at a nearby cafe, and she collapsed into the chair across from him. "I don't know if I did it right or made the biggest mistake of my life." "You did it perfectly," he reassured her. "You defended your values without being inflexible. You proposed a solution that benefits both sides. That's real negotiation." 47 hours later, 3 hours before the deadline, she received the call. They accepted her terms, impressed by her clarity of vision and willingness to negotiate instead of simply taking what was offered. Thea screamed with joy, then cried, then called her mother, Sloane Finally Griffin, who was already on his way to Magnolia and Maine with a bottle of champagne to celebrate. That night, after friends left and the shop was quiet, Thea and Griffin sat on the floor of the space they'd renovated together, drinking from plastic cups because all the real glasses were at home. "I never would have had the courage to negotiate like that without you," Thea admitted. "Would have accepted the first offer out of fear of losing it. And I never would have understood that some things are worth more than maximizing profits without you," Griffin responded. "You taught me that success can be measured in integrity maintained, not just money earned." They kissed softly, surrounded by the persistent scent of flowers and the future they'd just secured together. But that kiss, sweet and full of promise, also carried an unspoken weight. They both felt they were reaching a turning point where they'd have to decide if what they'd built was temporary or permanent. And that decision, they both knew, would require conversations they hadn't yet had. 2 months after the hotel contract, Magnolia and Maine operated at a sustainable pace. Thea had hired a junior floral designer, Piper, a talented young woman from the farmer's market who understood her vision. Together they trained the team, developing systems that preserved quality while increasing production. The first reports from the hotels were excellent. Guests commented on the unique arrangements, took photos for social media, asked where they could order similar pieces. Thea's mother recovered enough to visit the shop regularly, sitting in the small office and helping with simple paperwork. Life had found a balance that seemed almost too good to be true. It was during this period of relative calm that Thea and Griffin began talking about the future for real, not in abstract terms but in concrete plans. One night, dining at Griffin's penthouse, the apartment overlooking the harbor she'd visited only a handful of times, he finally asked the question he'd been avoiding. Where do you see this in 5 years? Us, I mean. Thea put down her fork, her heart racing. Why 5 years? Why not tomorrow or 10 years? Because 5 years is far enough to be honest about real plans, but not so far you can hide in vagueness. She considered the question carefully, looking through the floor-to-ceiling windows at Charleston's lights spreading toward the horizon. In 5 years, I want Magnolia and Maine to be a Charleston reference, people specifically seeking my work. I want my mother healthy and active. She paused, gathering courage. I want to build a life with someone, a real life, not just dinners and weekends, but the complete routine, the boring parts and the extraordinary ones. And could that someone be me? She looked at him directly. Could it be you? The man who has a family that barely accepts me, who lives in this $1 million penthouse while I live in a one-bedroom apartment in the historic district. The man who travels for business constantly while I need to be near my mother and my business. Yes, Griffin answered without hesitation. That man. Because that man has fundamentally changed in the past year. That man has restructured his life, prioritizing what truly matters, and what matters is you. Thea felt tears filling her eyes. I'm scared, Griffin. Scared that one day you'll wake up and realize you sacrificed too much. That your family was right, and a quarter girl doesn't fit in your world. Griffin moved to kneel in front of her, taking her hands. Listen to me. My world without you was empty. Luxurious, but empty. Successful, but meaningless. You don't fit in that world because that world doesn't deserve to have you. But I can build a new world. One where you and I find our own balance between the historic district and south of Broad, between flowers and technology, between our differences and our similarities. What about your family? My mother is trying. It's not perfect, but she's making the effort. My siblings, eventually they'll understand or they won't, but I won't let their approval or disapproval dictate my happiness. Thea let out a sob, half laugh, half cry. I love you too. I love you so much it scares me how intense it is. I love you so much that sometimes I think if this doesn't work out, I won't recover. Then let's not let it not work out, he responded simply. Marry me. The word fell between them like lightning. Thea looked at him, searching for jest or doubt, but found only absolute sincerity. What? Marry me, Griffin repeated, without a ring or elaborate preparation, just raw honesty. Not in 5 years, but now. Or in 6 months, or whenever you want. But I want to fully commit to this, to us. I want to wake up every morning knowing we built something together, not just a relationship, but a life. Are you crazy? Thea whispered, though her heart sang. We've been together less than a year. And in that year, you've completely transformed who I am. You taught me to value things I always ignored. You showed me that strength comes in many forms, not just bank accounts. So you made me want to be better, not just more successful. What else do I need to know? Thea stood, walking to the windows, processing. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman she barely recognized, stronger than a year ago, more confident, but also more vulnerable because she had so much to lose now. What if it doesn't work? She asked without turning. What if in 2 years you discover the differences are too big? Then we'll have tried. But Thea, he approached, standing behind her, I don't believe that'll happen. I believe we're stronger together than apart. I believe your roots and my reach can create something extraordinary. I believe in us. She turned, tears rolling freely now. Yes, yes, yes. I'll marry you. Not because I'm sure it'll be easy, but because I know it'll be real. And I'd rather have a real and complicated life with you than a simple and empty one without you. Griffin lifted her off the ground, kissing her deeply while Charleston glowed through the windows like thousands of silent witnesses. When he finally set her down, they were both laughing and crying simultaneously. I don't have a ring, he admitted. I don't need a ring yet. I need time to process that I just said yes to marrying a millionaire businessman when a year ago I could barely pay my rent. Do you regret it? Not for a second. They spent the rest of the night making plans, some practical, others absurd. Big wedding or small? In Charleston or somewhere special? When to tell the families? Where would they live? That last question was the most complex. Griffin's penthouse was impressive, but felt like a museum. Thea's apartment was cozy but tiny. They decided they'd look for something in between, something genuinely theirs. I want a garden, Thea said. Even if it's small, where I can grow flowers for the house. And I want space for an office. And for your mother when she needs to stay. And near James Island so I can get to the shop easily. But with parking because I have that ridiculous Mercedes I can't leave on the street. They laughed at the mundane nature of their concerns after such an emotional proposal. But that was exactly what they needed, anchoring big dreams in practical realities. They decided to tell Thea's mother first. Maeve cried with happiness, immediately hugging Griffin with strength that belied her still recovering heart. "You've made my daughter very happy," she told him, "and that's all a mother can ask for." Telling Cordelia was more complicated. Griffin scheduled lunch at the Ondina mansion, just him, his mother, and Thea. Tension was palpable when they arrived, but Thea walked with her head held high, carrying a modest floral arrangement as a peace offering. During the meal, they talked about safe subjects, Thea's business, recent developments in Griffin's company, Charleston news. Finally, as dessert was served, Griffin took Thea's hand across the table. "Mother, we have something to tell you. I asked Thea to marry me, and she said yes." Cordelia slowly put down her dessert spoon. Her eyes moved between them, processing. Silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Finally she spoke in careful English. "It's fast." "I know," Griffin responded. "But it's right." Cordelia turned to Thea. "Do you love him?" "With all my heart," Thea answered without hesitation. "And will you make him happy?" "I'm going to try every day of my life. And if my family makes things difficult for you, then I'll be strong. And I'll trust that Griffin will be by my side." Cordelia nodded slowly, something like respect crossing her face. "All right," she finally said. "If this is your decision, I respect it. I won't say I completely understand, or that it'll be easy for either of you. But I see how my son looks at you, and perhaps a mother doesn't always know what's best." It wasn't the effusive acceptance one might expect, but coming from Cordelia, it was enormous. Thea felt a knot in her throat loosen, one she didn't even know was there. Afterward, driving back to Charleston, Thea asked Griffin, "Do you think she'll ever fully accept me?" "Honestly, I don't know. But what I know is we don't need her complete acceptance to be happy. We just need her respect, and that I think we just got." Thea nodded, looking out the window at the coastal landscape passing by. They had a lot of work ahead, planning a wedding, finding a home, merging two very different lives. But for the first time she felt it was possible. Difficult, complicated, requiring constant compromise, but possible. And that, she discovered, was all she really needed. The possibility of a future together, built step by step with love and respect as foundation. The following months were a whirlwind of planning and change. Thea and Griffin decided on a small, intimate wedding, just immediate family and close friends, at a botanical garden outside Charleston. Nothing ostentatious or ceremonial, just honest celebration of their commitment. They found a house in a neighborhood between James Island and south of Broad, a geographic compromise that symbolized their entire relationship. It wasn't a mansion or tiny apartment, but a townhouse with a small garden, close enough to Magnolia and Maine for Thea to get there quickly, but with space for Griffin's office and a guest room for Maeve. The house renovation became their shared project, just as the shop had been. They chose historic Charleston tiles for the bathroom, installed shelves made by a local James Island carpenter, painted walls in earthy tones Thea loved. Griffin learned to use tools he'd never touched, while Thea learned about home automation systems Griffin considered essential. They fought, of course, about the kitchen color. She wanted terracotta. He wanted modern white. They compromised on warm beige. About whether they needed such an elaborate security system. He insisted due to his business nature. She conceded, though found it excessive. About where to hang family photos. They found space for both families, though with some tension. But each fight ended in conversation, each conflict resolved with compromise. They were learning the difficult art of building a shared life without losing individuality. Magnolia and Maine continued growing. The hotel contracts were successful, leading to gradual expansion as Thea had planned. She opened a small second workshop downtown, specializing in large events, while the James Island location maintained its focus on custom orders. Piper became a junior partner, taking more design responsibility, allowing Thea time for strategy without losing creative control. Griffin also made changes. He delegated more in his company, promoted young executives to leadership positions, reduced his work week from 70 hours to 45. His partners noticed the change, some with approval, others with criticism. But results spoke for themselves. The company didn't suffer. In fact, it thrived with more distributed leadership. He started a new personal project too, an investment fund focused on small traditional Charleston businesses that needed support to modernize without losing identity. He thought about all the pastry shops, pottery stores, bookstores that had almost been evicted from renovating buildings, and decided he could use his wealth for something more meaningful than accumulation. The Ashford family gradually, very gradually, accepted Thea. Sloane, Griffin's sister, was the first to extend a genuine olive branch, visiting Magnolia and Maine and being impressed by the professional operation. The brothers took longer, but eventually respected her when they saw she hadn't fundamentally changed Griffin, but helped his true self emerge. Cordelia remained distant but polite. She attended wedding planning events, gave opinions when asked, but maintained certain coolness Thea had accepted as her limit. They wouldn't be mother and daughter, but they could be polite and respectful. It was enough. A significant moment came 3 weeks before the wedding. Thea was working late at the James Island shop, designing her own bridal bouquet, a mix of magnolias, white hydrangeas, and antique peach roses, when Cordelia appeared unannounced. Thea startled seeing her at the door. "Cordelia, I wasn't expecting. Please come in." Cordelia entered, looking around the space with genuine interest. It was her first visit to the shop, and Thea saw the moment when she truly processed what her future daughter-in-law had built. "This is impressive," she said with sincerity. "Thank you. It's a lot of work, but worth it." Cordelia approached the bouquet in progress. "For the wedding?" "Yes. I'm designing each arrangement personally. I can't commission my own wedding to someone else." Cordelia nodded, delicately touching the magnolia petals. "My wedding had magnolias too. It was tradition in Charleston families." I'd almost forgotten the scent. They stood in shared silence, two women from different generations and worlds, united momentarily by flowers and memory. "I came to apologize," Cordelia finally said, "and to explain. I didn't reject you because you weren't enough. I rejected you because you had something I never had, the freedom to choose your own path. I married the man my family chose. I built the life expected of me. And I was miserable for decades before my husband finally left, with another younger, more appropriate woman." Thea was speechless at the unexpected vulnerability. "When I saw Griffin with you," Cordelia continued, "I saw what I never had. Real choice, real love, life built on genuine feeling instead of social convenience. And I was angry. Angry that my son had options I never had. Angry that the world had changed enough to allow it. It was selfish and unfair, and I'm sorry. Cordelia, let me finish. You're going to make my son happy in ways I never understood were possible, and though your world," she gestured around the modest shop, "is very different from mine, I see honesty in it, authenticity, real value, and that's something money can't buy, though I spent decades trying." Tears filled Thea's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything, just take care of my son. And let him take care of you too. Build something better than what I had. That's the only forgiveness and blessing I can offer." They hugged awkwardly, two women learning to navigate new territory. It wasn't perfect solution or complete closure, but it was real progress. And sometimes progress is all we can ask for. When Thea told Griffin about the visit that night, he held her for a long time. "My mother never talks about her marriage. The fact that she told you means she trusts you. That's huge." "Your family is complicated," Thea observed. "All families are complicated," Griffin responded. "They just vary in how they handle the complication." 2 weeks before the wedding, they officially moved into the new house. Friends and family helped carry boxes, assemble furniture, transform empty space into home. Maeve planted the first rose in the garden, her hands still slightly trembling, but her smile radiant. Sloane hung curtains while making sarcastic comments about the quarter girl who got the prince. Piper from the workshop brought she-crab soup for everyone, enough to feed a small army. That night, after everyone left, Thea and Griffin sat on the floor of their furnitureless living room, but full of boxes, sharing a bottle of cheap wine. "Do you regret anything?" Thea asked. "Nothing," Griffin answered without hesitation. And you? I regret doubting so much. Letting fear almost separate us. The fear was valid, the differences are real. But love is also real and stronger than the differences, it turns out. Stronger, he agreed, kissing her forehead. They fell asleep there, on the floor of their new house, surrounded by the physical evidence of the life they were building together. It wasn't perfect. It was complicated, required constant compromise, careful navigation of two very different worlds. But it was theirs, built with honesty and love, and that made it perfect in its own way. The wedding day dawned with completely blue skies, that deep blue of the Atlantic that only the coast truly knows. The botanical garden was transformed. Floral arches Thea had designed over months, petals scattered on stone paths, hanging lights that would glow when night fell. Thea prepared in a small garden room, surrounded by her mother, Sloane, and 3 lifelong friends. The dress was simple but elegant, ivory linen with antique Charleston lace that had belonged to her grandmother. She wore her hair loose in natural waves, just with small magnolia flowers woven through. "You're beautiful, honey," Maeve whispered, adjusting the veil with careful hands. "Your grandmother would be so proud." "I'm doing it, Gran," Thea murmured toward the sky. "I'm building my life like you built yours." Griffin prepared on another side of the garden with his brothers and close friends. The suit was designer, but in dark blue instead of traditional black, a concession to the less formal nature of the ceremony. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie for the 5th time. "Nervous?" asked his older brother, Marcus. "Terrified, but the right kind of terror. The kind that means it matters." "She's special, Griffin. Different from anyone you've ever known." "I know, that's why I'm here." Guests began arriving. Ashford family on one side, Thea's family and friends on the other. That Charleston social divide manifesting even at a uniting event. But when the music started and Thea appeared at the end of the floral path, the divisions vanished. She walked alone, with no one to give her away because she wasn't property to transfer. Her mother waited halfway, hugging her briefly before taking her seat. Thea continued to where Griffin waited, and when their eyes met, the rest of the world disappeared. The ceremony was short, simple but profound words. They wrote their own vows, and when the moment came, Thea spoke first, her voice trembling but clear. "Griffin, a year ago I didn't know it was possible for someone to see me so completely and still choose to stay. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that asking for help isn't surrender, that true love doesn't require perfection but honesty. I promise to build with you every day, face challenges without running, celebrate victories without forgetting where we came from. I promise to be your partner, not your project or your savior, but your equal in every way. I love you not despite our differences, but for how they challenge us to grow." Griffin took a deep breath before responding, tears shining in his eyes. "Thea, you entered my life like a tidal surge. Unexpected, powerful, transforming everything. You showed me I was living in a small world disguised as big, that success without meaning is just noise. You taught me the value of honest work, of real community, of building something with your own hands that truly matters. I promise never to try to change you, only to grow with you. I promise to defend us against any force that tries to diminish this. I promise every decision we'll make together, that your voice will always have equal weight to mine. And I promise to love you on difficult mornings as much as magical nights, because true love isn't just for easy moments." There wasn't a dry eye when they finished. Even Cordelia discreetly wiped tears with a lace handkerchief. The celebration that followed was exactly what they wanted. A mix of both worlds. Traditional low-country food prepared by city market restaurants, but served on elegant china. Music ranging from jazz to modern indie. Conversations flowing naturally between tables. The most significant moment came during the speeches. Sloane spoke first, making everyone laugh with stories of Thea trying to conquer the business world with pure stubbornness. "I met Thea when we were 7, sharing snacks at recess. I always knew she'd do big things, but I never imagined she'd find someone brave enough to accompany her without trying to lead her. Griffin, welcome to Thea's real family, those who love her exactly as she is." Marcus spoke for the Ashford family. "My brother has been many things, brilliant student, successful businessman, natural leader. but only in the past year have I seen him be genuinely happy. Thea, you taught us something our family had forgotten, that a person's value isn't in what they own, but in how they live. Thank you for returning my brother to us, more human than he's been in decades. Cordelia was last to speak, surprising everyone by standing. I'm not good with public emotions, she began, her voice firm. I spent my life building walls, maintaining appearances. But my son and Thea taught me that walls can be prisons and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is tear them down. She looked directly at Thea. At first I didn't understand you. Didn't understand why my son would choose complication when he could have ease. But now I see you're not complication. Your authenticity, in a world that forgot its value. Take care of my son, and let him take care of you. That's all a mother can ask. She sat quickly, and the applause was deafening. Thea crossed the room to hug her, and this time Cordelia returned the embrace without stiffness. When night fell, the garden transformed with hanging lights glowing like captured stars. Thea and Griffin danced their first song as spouses, moving slowly beneath the coastal sky, surrounded by everyone they loved. How do you feel? Griffin murmured against her hair. Complete, Thea responded. For the first time in my life, I feel completely where I should be. Me too. But even in that perfect moment, Thea felt a subtle shift. Not something bad, but an energetic transformation. Like when a flower finally opens completely, vulnerable but beautiful, exposed but blooming. They'd reached a point of no return, where their lives were no longer separate, but irrevocably intertwined. And that, she discovered as they danced, was exactly how it should be. The party continued until dawn. James Island neighbors danced with waterfront business people. Maeve's relatives shared stories with the Ashford family. The divisions that once seemed insurmountable dissolved in champagne, laughter, and shared celebration. When they finally said goodbye, with guests throwing magnolia petals over the newlyweds, Thea looked back one last time. She saw her mother laughing with Cordelia about something, Sloane taking selfies with Griffin's brothers, Piper from the workshop teaching traditional dance steps to Ashford cousins. "We did it," she whispered. "We did it," Griffin confirmed. And as they drove away to their honeymoon, a simple week at a beach house in Kiawa, far from luxury but close to the ocean, they both knew the real work was just beginning. Marriage wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. But they were ready. Together, they were ready for anything. 6 months after the wedding, life had found its rhythm. Thea and Griffin developed routines that balanced their different worlds. Early breakfasts in their garden before both left for work, dinners cooked together while sharing stories of the day, weekends alternating between Ashford family events and neighborhood gatherings in James Island. Magnolia and Maine had expanded to 4 hotels now, with the team growing to 12 employees. Thea had implemented an apprenticeship program where young people from the neighborhood could learn the craft, preserving traditional knowledge while modernizing the business. Piper was now a full partner, handling daily operations while Thea focused on strategy and high-level design. Griffin officially launched his investment fund in traditional Charleston businesses, with Thea as principal advisor. They'd already saved 5 family businesses from closure, helping them modernize without losing soul. It was work that gave him meaning that wealth accumulation never had. One spring afternoon, Thea was in their garden, planting a young magnolia tree they'd bought from a low-country nursery. Her hands, stained with soil, worked with the same precision she used for floral arrangements. Griffin came out with 2 glasses of sweet tea, sitting on the grass beside her. "We need to talk," Thea said without looking up from the tree. Griffin's heart jumped. Those words never announced anything good. "About what?" She finally looked at him, and her eyes shone with something he couldn't completely identify. "I'm pregnant." Time stopped. Griffin processed the words, and slowly an enormous smile spread across his face. You're sure?" 3 different tests and a doctor's appointment yesterday." "I'm sure." He lifted her from the ground, soil stains and all, spinning her while laughing. When he set her down, they both had tears in their eyes. "A baby. We're going to have a baby." "I'm terrified," Thea admitted. "Our lives are already complicated. How are we going to handle a child too?" "The same way we've handled everything else," Griffin responded, taking her dirty hands. "Together, one day at a time. With love and patience and probably many mistakes. Your mother will have opinions, My mother always has opinions, but this is our child, and we're raising them our way. That night, they called the families. Maeve cried with joy, immediately beginning to plan how she'd help. Cordelia also got emotional, though in a more contained way, offering resources and experience. For the first time, both future grandmothers worked together toward a common goal. The following months brought their own challenges. Thea had severe morning sickness, having to delegate more at the workshop. Griffin became overprotective to the point of being annoying, until Thea sat him down and firmly explained that pregnancy wasn't an illness. They redesigned the guest room into a nursery, combining elements from both families. Elegant furniture Cordelia insisted on gifting, but painted in traditional Charleston colors Thea chose. Floral mobiles she created mixed with modern technology Griffin installed. One afternoon, painting the walls soft yellow, Thea stopped and looked at Griffin. "Did you ever imagine this? 2 years ago, did you imagine you'd be here, painting a nursery with a French Quarter florist?" Griffin put down his roller, approaching her. 2 years ago, I couldn't imagine being truly happy. I didn't know it was possible to feel this. You showed me I was living a borrowed life, following a script written by others. And now," he touched her belly gently, "now we're going to write a new script for this little person. What if we mess it up? What if our differences confuse our child? Then our child will learn that life is complex, that love can connect different worlds, that strength comes from authenticity. Those are valuable lessons." The baby was born in October during those autumn Charleston days when the air turns soft and the sky seems bigger. A girl, small but strong, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's expressive hands. They named her Violet Maeve, Ashford Hartley, honoring flowers and family. The hospital filled with visitors, Ashford family bringing elaborate gifts, James Island friends bringing home cooking, Magnolia and Maine, employees with arrangements they'd created collectively. Cordelia and Maeve, the two grandmothers, sat side by side next to the crib, their differences forgotten before the shared miracle. "She's beautiful," Cordelia whispered. "Like her mother," Maeve responded, and both women smiled, united by grandmother love. When everyone left and the room was quiet, Thea and Griffin sat together on the hospital bed, with Violet sleeping between them. "Remember when we met?" Thea asked softly. "You walked into my shop irritated and rushed, and I questioned you like no one ever had. And I thought you were the most frustrating woman I'd ever met," Griffin responded with a smile. "Now you're the most extraordinary woman I know. I thought our differences would destroy us. Turned out they made us stronger." Thea looked at her sleeping daughter, so small and perfect. "What do you think we'll teach her?" "We'll teach her that value isn't in surnames or bank accounts, that honest work builds character, that true love requires courage to be vulnerable, that differences can be bridges instead of walls if we have the will to build them. We'll teach her about flowers," Thea added, "how each one has its moment and meaning, how to care for fragile things with strong hands, how to create beauty even when the world is difficult. And we'll teach her it's okay not to fit perfectly into any world," Griffin continued, "that she can create her own world, one that honors all parts of who she is." They remained in silence, listening to Violet's soft breathing, feeling the weight of responsibility and the privilege of shaping a new life. 3 years later, Thea was in their garden, now full of flowers she'd planted, magnolias, hydrangeas, antique roses, jasmine. Violet played in the grass, her little hands reaching for petals with fascination that reminded her mother at the same age. Griffin came out of the house with his phone in hand. That was Piper. The Spoleto Festival contract was approved. Magnolia and Maine will decorate the entire performance season. Thea smiled, but not with the explosion of emotion she'd have had years ago. Now success felt different, quieter, more integrated into the complete life they'd built. "That's wonderful," she said simply. "Just wonderful?" Griffin teased. 3 years ago you would have screamed with joy. 3 years ago professional success was all I had. Now it's just one part of a much fuller life." He sat beside her on the grass, watching Violet chase a butterfly. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Really happy, not just content but deeply satisfied?" Thea considered the question seriously. She looked around, her garden full of life, her daughter laughing, her husband beside her, the business flourishing, the families finally at peace. "I'm happy," she finally answered. Not the way I imagined when I was young. I thought happiness would be simple. Financial success, stability, absence of problems. But this is better. It's more complicated, requires more work, is never perfect. But it's real. And we built it together with our own hands. Even with the difficult parts, Griffin pressed. The arguments with my family, the exhausting days, the sleepless nights with Violet, the constant pressures. Especially with the difficult parts, Thea affirmed. Because those are the parts that make us real. Anyone can be happy when everything's easy. True love, true life, is measured in how we navigate the difficult. Griffin kissed her softly. How your grandmother would be proud of you, not just for the business success, but for how you kept your essence while growing. Tears filled Thea's eyes. She would have loved to meet Violet, see how the lessons she taught me continue to another generation. She knows, Griffin responded, pointing to the magnolia tree they'd planted years ago, now large and healthy. Every flower in this garden, every arrangement you create, every value you teach our daughter. Your grandmother is in all of it. That night, after putting Violet to bed, Thea and Griffin went up to their rooftop, where they'd created a small space with chairs and soft lights. Charleston spread before them, the harbour lights where Griffin had lived before, the modest neighbourhoods of James Island, and the historic district where Thea had grown up, all blending into an urban tapestry that no longer represented division, but integration. Do you ever regret, Thea asked, choosing this instead of the simpler life you could have had? Never, Griffin answered without hesitation. The simple life I had was an illusion. It seemed easy because I never questioned anything, never risked anything real. This, he pointed to the city, to their shared life, is more complicated but infinitely more valuable. We built something beautiful, didn't we? Thea murmured, resting her head on his shoulder. We built something extraordinary. Not just a business or a house or a family, but a bridge between worlds that weren't supposed to meet, between tradition and modernity, between privilege and work, between expectations and authenticity. They stayed there while Charleston's night sky glowed above them, ancient constellations watching the city that constantly reinvented itself. And in that moment, surrounded by the life they'd built with determination and love, they both understood something fundamental. True strength isn't in avoiding challenges, but in facing them together. True success isn't measured in accumulated wealth, but in lives touched and values maintained. And true love isn't finding someone perfect, but building something perfect with someone imperfect. One flower at a time, one decision at a time, one day at a time. Flowers, as Thea's grandmother had taught so many years ago, speak when people cannot. And in that garden, Thea and Griffin had cultivated together, literally and metaphorically. The flowers told a story of hope, transformation, and the eternal possibility that love can bloom even in the most unlikely soil. Because in the end, where there is true love, deep roots, and the will to grow even in difficult conditions, there will always be a place where dreams bloom. And so, beneath the Charleston sky that had witnessed every moment of their journey, Thea and Griffin understood they had found something more precious than any fortune, more lasting than any construction. They had found home in each other, and in that home, they built a future where the past was honored and the present celebrated and tomorrow promised, where each difference became strength and each challenge an opportunity to grow together.